Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always had this thing with my hair. I like to keep it long and shaggy. You know that messy, just rolled out of bed look that some people love and others hate. That's my signature style. It's not super long or anything, but definitely longer than what most guys typically wear. And honestly, I really don't care what anyone thinks about it. The main reason I keep it this way is pretty simple. I hate getting haircuts. The whole experience gives me anxiety. I've tried dozens of different barbers and hairstylists, but I've never found one that really gets what I want. Plus, I'll admit it, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to maintenance. Why deal with regular haircuts when I can just let it grow? My father, though, he's had a problem with my hair since day one. He's one of those old school guys who thinks men should have short, masculine haircuts. And when I say he has a problem with it, I mean he's completely obsessed. He's got some serious anger issues, and my hair somehow became his favorite target. Every family gathering, every dinner, every time his friends were over, it was the same story. He'd yell at me, saying I looked like a girl and demanding that I get it cut. I tried to stand my ground, telling him I liked it this way. But he'd just get angrier, throwing homophobic slurs at me and ordering me to get to the barber. Sometimes, just to keep the peace, I'd cave in and get it cut. But as I got older, his bullying had the opposite effect. The more he pushed, the more determined I became to keep my hair exactly how I wanted it. It became this silent battle between us, him trying to control my appearance and me refusing to give in. This went on for years. Every holiday, every weekend visit, he'd demand to know when I was going to start looking like a real man. When I'd ask him when he'd stop obsessing over my hair, he'd snap back at me for talking back, complaining that I was embarrassing him in front of everyone with what he called a mop on my head. Then came the day that changed everything. I was home one weekend digging through some old boxes in the attic looking for my elementary school yearbooks. I was feeling nostalgic and wanted to show my cousin some embarrassing photos from our childhood. That's when I found it, my father's high school yearbook. I wasn't really planning to look through it, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open, and there it was, his junior year photo. I actually had to do a double take because for a second, I thought I was looking at a picture of myself. There he was, my supposedly traditional masculine father, sporting the exact same hairstyle he'd been giving me hell about for years. And when I say exact, I mean exact. The same length, the same shaggy look, even the same way it fell across his forehead. The only difference was that his was in black and white, and he was wearing this absolutely ridiculous jean jacket that somehow made the whole thing even better. The hypocrisy was just too perfect. I took a photo of the page with my phone, then carefully put the yearbook back where I found it. I knew exactly what I was going to do with this golden piece of evidence. I didn't have to wait long. That very evening during dinner, he started up again, telling me I needed to do something about my hair because I looked like a homeless person. I just smiled, pulled out my phone, pulled up the photo, and slid it across the table to him. His eyes went wide, then narrow, then wide again. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in my life, my father was completely speechless. My mother, who had been quietly eating her dinner, leaned over to look at the photo. Her reaction was pure gold. She burst out laughing, asking if that was really him and commenting on his hair. She laughed so hard she nearly choked on her food. My father's face turned about 50 different shades of red. My mother got up right then and there, took my phone, and went to print out the photo. 10 minutes later, she came back and stuck it right on the fridge with a magnet, right next to our family photos. She declared it was what she called a family resemblance, which only made my father more uncomfortable. That was 3 months ago. My father hasn't said a single word about my hair since then. Not one comment, not one complaint, nothing. Every time he looks like he's about to say something, his eyes drift over to that photo on the fridge, and he just closes his mouth and walks away. The photo is still there on the fridge, and my mother refuses to take it down. She says it's her favorite family photo now. Sometimes I catch her showing it to visitors, always with the biggest grin on her face. My father tries to stop her from showing it to anyone else, but she just sweetly tells him that he looked handsome with his long hair, just like I do now. I moved into my new apartment complex about 3 months ago after accepting a position as a software engineer at a local tech startup. Being of Russian descent and having moved around quite a bit in my childhood due to my father's work in international business, I naturally have a slight accent. It never really caused me any problems before. If anything, most people found it interesting and would ask about my background. That all changed when I met my next-door neighbor, who I later learned was a middle school teacher and Sunday school instructor at the local church. The first time we crossed paths in the hallway, she gave me this strange look and hurried past me while clutching her purse. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people are just naturally anxious around strangers, right? But things started getting weird pretty quickly. Whenever I get my mail, I catch her watching me through her door's peephole. If I was in the building's shared laundry room, she'd walk in, see me, and immediately walk out with her laundry basket. Once, I even saw her taking pictures of me when I was unloading groceries from my car. I tried to address it directly one day when I saw her in the hallway. I politely approached her, mentioning that I'd noticed her discomfort around me and asked if I could introduce myself properly. Before I could finish speaking, she cut me off, demanding that I stay back and claiming she knew exactly who and what I was. When I expressed my confusion, she became more agitated, telling me not to play dumb. She said she'd seen enough movies to know how people like me operate, and that my tech job was just a cover story. When I tried to explain that I had no idea what she was talking about, she accused me of being a Russian spy. She claimed I was there to eliminate her because of her important work educating youth about American values, and that she'd seen me watching her and taking notes on my phone. I attempted to explain I was just ordering takeout, but she dismissed my explanation, telling me to save it for my handlers in Moscow. She then claimed she'd already alerted building management and they were investigating my background. I reported these interactions to our building manager, who assured me they had received no such complaints and suggested I document any further incidents. I also started taking a different route to my apartment when possible, just to avoid any confrontation. But everything came to a head last Friday night. I was returning from a late night at work, exhausted and just wanting to get home. The elevator doors opened and there she was, already inside. I almost took the stairs instead, but it was a 14-floor climb, and I was carrying a heavy laptop bag. I stepped in, pressing myself into the corner furthest from her. She immediately started taunting me, asking if I had finally decided to do it, and suggesting this was the perfect opportunity for an assassination. When I tried to calm the situation by explaining I just wanted to get home and wasn't going to hurt her, she screamed at me to shut up, announcing that she had been preparing for this. That's when she pulled out a pocket knife. Before I could react, she lunged forward and stabbed me in the shoulder. The pain was immediate and intense. I dropped my laptop bag and pressed the emergency button while trying to keep pressure on my wound. She started screaming for help, claiming that the Russian spy was attacking her. I could only shout back that she was the one who had stabbed me. The elevator stopped at the lobby, where security was already waiting due to the emergency button. She immediately launched into a story about how I had cornered her in the elevator, and she had to defend herself from a Russian assassination attempt. Security took one look at my bleeding shoulder and called both an ambulance and the police. The whole time she kept ranting about Russian spies and how she was a target because of her vital role in shaping young American minds. The police arrived first. They separated us and took our statements. Initially, they seemed unsure who to believe, until I mentioned the security cameras in the elevator. Her face went pale. The footage clearly showed her attacking me unprovoked. But that wasn't all. The police discovered she had been writing elaborate conspiracy theories about me on various online forums, documenting her evidence of my supposed espionage activities. She had even created a whole bulletin board in her apartment, connecting random photos of me to news articles about Russian intelligence operations. She was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and underwent a psychiatric evaluation. Turns out she had been developing increasingly paranoid delusions over the past year, but nobody at her school or church had picked up on it because she was generally functional and good at hiding it from people she wasn't fixated on. The wound required 12 stitches, and I had to take a week off work. My company was understanding, and my lawyer says the civil suit against her looks very strong. She's been fired from both her teaching positions and is currently in a psychiatric facility. The building management didn't renew her lease, and I heard they're covering the cost of breaking mine if I want to move somewhere else. I decided to stay though. The other neighbors have been incredibly supportive, often bringing me meals while I recovered and helping me with groceries. Some of them admitted they had noticed her odd behavior but hadn't realized how serious it was getting. They felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. The next time someone moves in next door, I just hope they're more interested in borrowing sugar than uncovering imaginary espionage plots. Back in the early 2000s, I started noticing something odd about my wife's behavior. We had two young kids, around 4 and 6 at the time, and they kept mentioning staying at their grandparents' house. Now, this wouldn't have been strange except for the fact that their grandparents lived 90 minutes away, and this was happening 2 or 3 times every week on days my wife wasn't at her part-time job. When I confronted her about it, I casually brought up how the kids had mentioned spending a lot of time at her parents' house lately. She tried to play it off, saying, yeah, they loved visiting them. When I pointed out that it was a 3-hour round trip and asked if she was really doing this multiple times a week, she got defensive and claimed the kids must be exaggerating, insisting it wasn't that often. I knew she was lying, she was never good at it, her voice would get slightly higher, and she'd avoid eye contact. So I started tracking the mileage on her car. Sure enough, she was racking up an extra 400 miles every week. One day, fate handed me the smoking gun. She'd left a sticky note with her email password next to the computer. I know I shouldn't have, but I logged in. What I found were several email exchanges between her and her college best friend about how she was regularly sleeping with her high school ex-boyfriend. In their messages, they were even mocking his current wife. My wife cruelly commented about how the other woman had gotten fat after having kids, saying he had clearly traded down when he married her. Her friend laughed along, saying it was no wonder he kept coming back to my wife. I printed those emails and contacted a private investigator recommended by my police officer friend. The investigator did an amazing job. He got photos, dates, times, everything. The whole routine was laid bare. She'd drop our kids at her parents', meet this guy for lunch, spend a few hours at a cheap motel, then pick up the kids and come home like nothing happened. I went straight to a divorce lawyer. Growing up, I'd watched my parents' marriage implode due to cheating, and I wasn't about to let my kids go through that trauma. But I wanted to make sure this guy faced consequences too. The investigator dug deeper and found out this man was a vice president at his father-in-law's company. He had a wife and 3 kids of his own. Perfect. I had my lawyer prepare divorce papers and asked the investigator for extra copies of his report. Then I set my plan in motion. The day my wife got served with divorce papers at work, she called me in tears. She had the audacity to ask how I could do this to her and our family. I turned it back on her, asking how she could do this to our family. When she pretended not to know what I was talking about, I brought up her motel visits with her ex. That shut her up for a moment. Then she accused me of having her followed. I told her I didn't need to. She'd left her email password out. But the real karma came when the investigator met with the guy's wife that same day. She was actually a lovely person who deserved to know the truth. She immediately emptied their joint bank accounts, took their kids, and left. When her father found out why, he fired his cheating son-in-law on the spot. Even better, since his in-laws owned the house they lived in, he got evicted too. Their divorce was gloriously messy. He showed up at the house one day, making a scene. He was yelling about how they couldn't do this to him, claiming it was his house too. His wife reminded him that it was actually her parents' house and threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. When he refused to leave until they talked about it, her brother showed up and broke the guy's nose. There were restraining orders, criminal charges, and he even did some jail time. I heard he left the state entirely. His ex-wife took over her father's company after he retired. As for my ex-wife and me, we kept things civil for the kids. Now that they're adults, I don't talk to her at all. I don't hate her. She's my children's mother, and that's important to them. But that's where my concern for her ends. Turns out karma doesn't appreciate entitled people who think they can have their cake and eat it too. My ex-wife thought she could have a perfect family life while destroying another family on the side. Her boyfriend thought he could cheat on his wife while living off her family's wealth, and they both learned the hard way that actions have consequences. I met my girlfriend 3 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. She was there with her 2 kids, and I was immediately struck by how well behaved they were compared to the other children running around. We started dating, and despite my initial nervousness about blended families, my own parents had divorced when I was young. Her 9-year-old and 12-year-old were wonderful. My parents even treated them like grandkids from day one. This year, my tech startup finally took off after years of barely breaking even. We landed several major contracts, and to celebrate, I planned a Disney World trip for our family, including a stay at the Grand Floridian. My girlfriend was ecstatic, telling me the kids had never been there and would be so excited. Then came the complications. 2 days later, she nervously told me her ex-husband had heard about the trip from the kids and insisted on coming too, bringing his wife and their baby. He claimed he wanted to be there for their first Disney experience. After much arguing, I reluctantly agreed, though I knew it was a mistake. But it got worse. My girlfriend revealed he couldn't afford the Grand Floridian and suggested we look at other hotels. When I agreed to that, she cheerfully suggested I cancel our Grand Floridian reservation and use that money to book their suite too. She argued that he was contributing by paying for his family's flights. I had to clarify what she was asking, that I should downgrade our vacation and pay for his family's accommodation. I refused, explaining that being able to afford something doesn't mean I have to pay for her ex's vacation. She insisted the kids wanted their dad there, to which I responded that he could take them himself. After a heated argument, I gave her tickets for just her and the kids and canceled everything else. Her ex called to berate me, calling me a piece of work and accusing me of breaking his kids' hearts. I shot back, pointing out his hypocrisy by asking where this concern was when he left them for his secretary. The next day brought a shocking revelation. My girlfriend's sister called to tell me he had been planning this for months. He'd learned about my startup's success from social media and had been bragging to everyone about planning a big Disney vacation for the kids, even specifically mentioning the Grand Floridian. When he heard about our plans from the kids, he saw his opportunity to make it happen at my expense. Furious, I found his social media posts from months ago and forwarded them to my girlfriend. She was mortified, having no idea he'd been manipulating the situation. She apologized, saying he had claimed to only find out when the kids mentioned it. I gently pointed out that he had been manipulating situations like this for years, and she finally admitted it, saying she had never seen it clearly before. We ended up taking the kids to Disney World, staying at the Grand Floridian as originally planned. When her ex tried to guilt-trip the kids about not being invited, my girlfriend shut that down fast. Better yet, she finally got a proper custody agreement drawn up, complete with communication boundaries. The kids had an amazing vacation, making memories they'll never forget. But I gained something even better than a magical vacation. A girlfriend who finally saw her ex for who he really was and was ready to set proper boundaries. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.